such a beautiful and iconic piano part. It's familiar to many of you as part of a popular classic rock song, or maybe you know it from the montage scene in the movie Goodfellas. It starts out with power and strength, then moves to a simple melody, then an unexpected mournful sound. That's my favorite part. Simultaneously hopeful, yet tragic. Perhaps it unknowingly foreshadowed a future tragic event involving the piano performer on the original recording.
What is it about music that can impact how we feel? Does the songwriter deliberately try to make us feel something? Or did the final result emerge from a more natural outgrowth of simply playing for their enjoyment or desire to express how they were feeling? Perhaps they crafted it with the expressed purpose of generating a hit that would make them rich and famous. The impetus for creative output is a force that takes on many shapes.
So how did these sounds transition from an unaccompanied 33 seconds on a music machine, a piano,
to their ubiquity on vinyl, radio, 8-track tape, eventually CDs and MP3s? What equipment was used to capture and enhance the performance? Who were the people in the band? How did they learn how to play musical instruments? And what was the path that led them to commercial success and lives beyond music's spotlight? Well, maybe we can get answers to some of these questions and many more on an adventure in exploring music and the machines that help make and shape it.
So if you feel connected to music, or maybe even play a musical instrument, or you're just curious about various things musical, then come on along.
"20 years into the 21st century, sound and music are more intertwined with our lives than at any other point in history. And it all begins with sound. First, there was sound. And then there was music. Sound is everywhere, pervasively unnoticeable and often unavoidable. And how did it become such a large part of our existence? Sound can be musical. But not all sound is music. Sound can be subtle. Sound can be alerting. Sound can be destructive and constructive. Sound can get attention. Sound can be soothing. Music inherently needs sound because music is auditory. We perceive sound only through our sense of hearing. We may think that we visually sense sound. It may be complementary, but it is secondary. Here is a clip of waves crashing on the beach. But now let's try it without sound. Quite a different, emptier experience without it. Well, what is sound? At its core, sound is a type of energy made by vibrations that travel in waves. It's a physics thing. These vibrations cause a disturbance in the air particles around it. Billions and billions in 1 cubic inch. And those particles hit the particles next to them, and so on, spreading a wave of particles until the particles reach your ears, and then they are perceived as sound. Sound can be described as pleasant, piercing, whimsical. These are qualitative characteristics, but sound can also be measured scientifically. This is accomplished by using two primary quantitative characteristics, frequency and amplitude. Frequency is a measurement of the sound wave's vibrations per second. A low number of vibrations per second results in a low-pitched sound, and a higher number of vibrations per second results in a higher-pitched sound. Although I'm emphasizing vibrations for clarity purposes, the unit of measurement for frequencies is actually called hertz, named in honor of Heinrich Hertz for his scientific contributions relating to electromagnetic waves. This tuning fork creates a sound that is a frequency of 440 hertz, meaning 440 vibration cycles per second. It produces the same vibrations as the open A string on a guitar. Frequencies from 20 to 20,000 hertz are audible to the human ear. Any sound below 20 hertz is infrasound. These sounds are audible to certain whales and elephants. Any sound above 20,000 hertz is ultrasound, and this sound is used in science for other familiar purposes. Amplitude is a measure of the power of the sound wave. We perceive amplitude as volume. It is an expression of soft or loud, expressed in decibels, or dB for short. The decibel scale is actually repurposed from the telephone industry. The bell in decibel, previously known as transmission unit, was so named as a tribute to the telephone's inventor, Alexander Graham Bell. Amplitude is the height of the wave, and frequency is the width. Only in the 19th century did we begin to have a more concrete scientific understanding of sound properties, which coalesce to our understanding today. When you can measure, define, test, and confirm, you really have a solid foundation to build upon. And this is why understanding frequency and amplitude are important. But philosophers and scientists from antiquity focused efforts on trying to better understand sound. Pythagoras in the 6th century BC discussed translation of musical notes into mathematical equations. Aristoxenus, a Greek philosopher and pupil of Aristotle, wrote on rhythm, meter, and harmonics. In the 1st century BC, Roman architect and engineer Vitruvius wrote a treatise on the acoustic properties of theaters, including echoes and reverberation. Now, before we get to music, one last important context for sound. How do we process sound? Well, any sound, whether coming out of a speaker or directly from a musical instrument, makes sound waves in the air. The outer ear catches the waves, which then travel through a narrow passageway called the ear canal. The sound waves reach the eardrum, which is a membrane roughly half the size of a dime. The waves make the eardrum vibrate, which in turn vibrates 3 tiny bones called the malleus, incus, and stapes. These bones amplify the volume of the sound vibrations and send them to the cochlea. The cochlea is shaped like a snail and is the size of a kernel of corn. It is filled with fluid, and the sound vibrations make this fluid ripple, which creates waves. Inside the cochlea, hair-like structures called stereocilia sit on top of hair cells and are grouped together as hair cell bundles. The hair cells inside the cochlea ride these waves, and the bundles are moved. The bundle on top of the hair cells turns these movements into electrical signals. As the bundles are moved, ions rush into the top of the hair cells, causing the release of chemicals at the bottom of the cells. The chemicals bind to the auditory nerve cells and create an electrical signal which travels along the auditory nerve to the brain. Different hair cells respond to specific frequencies of sound. The hair cells at the base of the cochlea detect higher-pitched sounds, such as a guitar solo high up on the neck. The hair cells toward the top of the spiral detect progressively lower-pitched sounds, such as a tenor sax. At the very top of the spiral, the hair cells detect the lowest pitch sounds, such as a tuba. The auditory nerve carries the electrical signal to the brain, which interprets the messages as sounds that we recognize and understand. So how does sound become music? It comes down to making good vibrations, good sound vibrations, within some duration. Once we are deliberately generating melody, harmony, and/or rhythm within some time dimension, then we are participating in a universal cultural tradition across all human societies. Music. Music is often very structural and patterned, and other times it's free-form and chaotic. Our voice is almost certainly the first human musical instrument, and although it's built in, many of us have developed it so that it can be used to soothe, impress, or entertain. Evidence of primitive attempts at making musical instruments goes back tens of thousands of years. Artifacts dating back to the late Stone Age are some of the oldest known musical instruments. In 2008, archaeologists working in the Hohlefels cave in the mountains of southern Germany discovered a flute made of the radius bone of a griffin vulture. It's approximately 40,000 years old. It's well preserved with 5 finger holes and V-shaped notches at one end for the player to blow into. Humans have been continually trying to add more music into our lives. Music while we work, music while we play, while we worship and celebrate. And we get help from machines. So enough about the background, let's get to the adventure. Music and Machines is on an adventure in Hollywood. We're at a nondescript, unassuming building on Sunset Boulevard. You wouldn't know it from the looks, but more recorded musical output has come out of this facility than few other studios around the world over the last 60 years. It's called EASTWEST Studios. It's a modern, state-of-the-art recording studio complex with clients that include many A-list musical artists from Lady Gaga to John Legend, Rihanna, and Elvis Costello. But there's a deeper connection. This facility was the former United Western Recorders, which, alongside Capitol and Gold Star, were some of the busiest studios during the heyday of the American music studio system of the 1960s and 70s. We spent some time in the famous Studio 3. This room is where California Dreamin' was recorded, as well as the Beach Boys' Surfin' USA and the Pet Sounds album. In the book Wouldn't It Be Nice, Brian Wilson referred to it as his studio. And it's where he met Tony Asher, the ad man and lyricist who collaborated with Wilson on Pet Sounds, including the classic God Only Knows. The studio has a classic original Trident console, and much of the interior has retained the classic look of that earlier period. It all began with Bill Putnam. He was a pioneer and key figure in the commercial recording industry. Putnam founded Universal Recording in Chicago. Universal's innovative and creative approach to recording garnered attention and built his reputation in the recording industry. With urging from top artists, he made the decision to set up shop in the burgeoning music center of Los Angeles. Within a few years, the United Western complex was cranking out some of the highest quality recordings in the industry, and doing so for top artists of the day. Putnam's Universal location in Chicago now hosts high-end stores in Chicago's Mag Mile area, and you can still see the outline of the building's classic shape. The purpose of any recording studio is to capture musical performances and utilize technology to produce the best audio possible for a variety of end uses, from commercial jingles, song demos, artist recordings, and movie soundtracks. We'll give you an idea of what goes on inside this or any recording studio. From hearing just the audio, it appears that Ron is playing his saxophone unaccompanied. However, he was actually playing along to some pre-recorded music tracks. The following provides insight into his surroundings and focus of a studio session. When recording music in a studio, the musician plays in an isolation room called a sound booth. It is connected to a control room which contains sound equipment and software operated by an engineer. The two rooms are separated by a window and a door. An instrument like a saxophone may not be playing during the entire song. Sometimes the musician will be waiting, grooving, or just listening. When it is time to play, he moves his instrument in place at a prescribed distance from the microphone. The mic, for short, is the input hardware for recording his performance. The process of capturing the performance via the microphone is known as tracking. The microphone interacts with the audio software such as Pro Tools to save the data to disk. For a non-computer-based recording, aka analog, the microphone output is written to magnetic tape using a recording machine. The music is pumped through his headphones, which are known as cans. He is able to control the volume coming from his saxophone alongside other instruments coming through the output to his headphones. A good balance of volume from his instrument and the others will encourage focus to optimize the best performance. The other instruments might be a combination of vocals, guitar, piano, drums, etc. And if no percussion or drums are included, a steady time-keeping element known as a click will likely be present to help ensure that there is general synchronicity between the musical parts, particularly when the musicians are not in the same room playing together. A click, or click track, is essentially an electronic metronome. This is what it would sound like in his headphones with a click track. Why is he playing into a microphone? The audio that is coming out of the camera output seems pretty good. Well, certain microphones are best suited to capture the sounds of specific instruments. This microphone is connected to hardware that interacts with the digital audio software, again, Pro Tools or Logic, and it allows it to not only be written but completes the save to disk. When recording, the musicians can be in the same room, but as depicted here, the same parts would bleed together and you would not have a way to control the volume or other aspects of the individual parts. The audio software displays Ron's recording alongside other instruments in a timeline. This provides a mechanism to control the volume and other aspects of the process of building and stitching together a song. When the musician is done with his performance, he may use nonverbal cues to communicate to the audio engineer that he is done recording. The engineer will stop the process, which completes the save. The engineer can then play back the part to the musician, either through his headphones, or he can come out of the booth and into the control room for listening back to the performance. The musician can redo the part, either as an additional performance known as a take or a pass, meaning a separate track in the project, or he can punch in, meaning a live edit to fix or change a part on an existing track. Certain edits to fix a flat or sharp note can be remedied by using special add-in elements in the software known as plugins. Well, there are the basics. I hope it gives you a pretty good idea of what it's like to record in a studio. The first machine that we're going to cover on Music and Machines is a groundbreaking device to capture sound, to immortalize it, and then allow for those sounds to be heard back. Given the enormous impact recorded sound has on our daily lives, from music to visual entertainment, podcasts, and audiobooks, it's an origin story worth understanding. This single invention was generated by a very familiar inventor. We are going to take a deep dive into the origins of the machine and the series of innovations behind it.
In 1877, Thomas Edison was the first person to record and play back sound. His first words, "Mary had a little lamb." His invention was called the phonograph.
Biographies and stories of invention concerning Edison are plentiful, particularly those focused on the electric light bulb. However, there is not enough attention paid to his impact on recorded sound and music. His contributions in these areas were impactful and numerous, and the story of how recorded sound launched him into the limelight as a renowned scientist was via an inadvertent path. Edison was known for his voracious appetite for invention, whether generating original creations or providing improvements to those of other inventors. In his lifetime, he was awarded over 1,000 patents. Edison's approach to innovation is characterized by a hands-on, trial-and-error strategy focused more on an iterative method of discovery rather than a theoretical approach. Early on, Edison recognized the need for inventions to have practical value. And even with that standard, he did not always fully recognize the extent and variety of end uses that would result from his creations. Most of his inventions fall into three sensory-based categories: communication, sight, and sound. Edison's landmark sound invention, the phonograph, U.S. Patent 200521, filed on December 24, 1877, opened the door to several new industries, some direct, such as sound recording and the commercial music industry, where Edison was one of the first record label bosses, and paved the way for derivative industries such as radio, television, audiobooks, mobile phones. The list goes on, and it officially launched on that Christmas Eve. And all of this contribution from a man that was nearly deaf and did not even like the popular music of his day. Edison and his team of engineers at the world's first research lab, which he referred to as his invention factory, were able to create the phonograph in a very short amount of time. Edison himself said that he was apprehensive of things that worked on the first attempt, and he faced a certain degree of shock at the initial success. The machine improved greatly over subsequent years, but upon its creation, it was fully functioning. It recorded and played back sound.
Edison made a sketch of his idea, and he assigned the task of creating a prototype to one of his engineers, John Crucy. Crucy was able to make a successful prototype. Edison was astonished when he was able to hear his words spoken and then played back.
He later said, "I was never so taken aback in all my life." Two other inventors, Charles Cros and Edward Leon Scott de Martinville, had previously made attempts at the same goal, but had only partial success. The reality is that Edison had a huge head start in the science behind the phonograph. His direct research into its creation was not even a priority. There were a variety of technical projects that his engineers were working at any given time, but most revolved around three key areas: telegraphy, telephony, and inscription, specifically his automatic telegraph, telephone technology, and the electric pen. Edison was an experimenter from a young age. While still in his teens, he became a telegrapher, a sparker in the parlance of the times. The telegraph system was the internet of its day, and the new technology was being implemented all over the world. The utility poles we know today as telephone poles began as the infrastructure for the telegraph system. And America is still flush with frontage roads named Telegraph Road and Wire Road. Edison's closeness to telegraphy, his passion for invention, and growing knowledge of electricity and material and physical science led him to become an inventor of improvements to telegraph systems. His success allowed him to form companies and partnerships and grow his operations. One of the telegraphy inventions Edison and team were working on was a mechanism to capture the indentations of the telegraph's dots and dashes on a physical surface, and then reverse the process to play it back. This was essentially one of the first record and play technologies. In the interim, Edison had also developed the electric pen, which used a stylus, also known as a needle, to generate document content so that it could be duplicated. It eventually led to the mimeograph in the 20th century, and in 1891, Samuel O'Reilly, a New York City tattoo artist, repurposed Edison's electric pen design and received a patent for the first electric tattoo needle. Thanks, Edison. An outgrowth of telegraphy was telephony. When Alexander Graham Bell introduced the telephone in the late 1870s, Edison had already been working with sound technology, reeds, resonators, and sound boxes, but simply as acoustic measurement tools used in improving telegraph message output. Then, at the Centennial Exhibition of 1876 in Philadelphia, Edison observed firsthand Alexander Graham Bell's use of sound for speech communication. The telephone Bell produced had poor audio quality. This motivated Edison to redirect efforts towards sound technology beyond the current scope. Edison and an associate on his team, Charles Batchelor, focused research and experiments on several components, including the diaphragm, which is the surface area receiving sound vibrations, even studying principles of sound mechanics published by Hermann von Helmholtz, which resulted in more acceptable clarity and sibilance. Specifically, this refers to the physical capability of the device to create certain core sounds of the human voice. The accumulation of knowledge and hands-on experience with sound from 1875 to 1877 positioned Edison and his team to eventually pursue an attempt at recording and playing back sound, simply as an outgrowth of related technologies.
Although minimal hours were directly invested in the phonograph, A vast amount of indirect investment went into the overall process.
This is evidenced by numerous sound and inscription patents that Edison filed in this period, prior to the creation of the phonograph. The first phonograph had familiar technical components, a stylus, an inscription technology to etch an analog of the sound wave, a diaphragm to contour sound input, and record and playback mechanism.
Effectively, Edison had accumulated a powerful bag of tricks that gave him an advantage over other potential inventors who may have wanted to create a similar device from an idea alone.
Specifically, the prior experience with the automatic telegraph, telephone technology, and the electric pen, in conjunction with expertise in the latest in electricity, electromagnetism, and material science, allowed Edison and team to make the leap to the phonograph with a relatively simple effort. And this was key to the invention's success. The leveraging of incremental invention is a real-world example of what innovation author Stephen Johnson refers to as the adjacent possible. When experimenting with electromagnetism, Edison discovered what he called etheric force. It was later understood to be radio waves. His further work with electromagnetism resulted in him becoming an inventor and pioneer of another key audio technology, the microphone. One ironic postscript is that the carbon button microphone that he created in the late 1870s for use with the telephone could not be used in audio recording at the time. The acoustic inscription-based model of recording, known as the acoustic era, lasted until the 1920s when technology caught up to allow sound waves to be captured by microphones in the subsequent audio recording phase, known as the electric era.
This rotary dial telephone from my youth has something of interest inside the mouthpiece. It's a Thomas Edison carbon button microphone. These phones were manufactured all the way through the early 1980s. Pretty good for 100 years of technology from Thomas Edison.
So what we have here is something that might look strange, a machine from the past with a strange horn protruding from it. But actually, this was the original phonograph. Now, I know that might be confusing because there's no place for the vinyl. This is the original Edison phonograph, and I'm going to give a little demonstration of the phonograph so you can get an understanding of what it was like to use early sound playback mechanisms. In addition to playing music, this device was the first device that could also record music. So it is an early example of how people recorded sound. What does this thing sound like? Let's go through it. It has some components that are similar to a phonograph of newer age, where it has a stylus, which most of us call a needle. It has that under here. This has a playback head on it, and it has a speaker, and they called the speaker a horn. Now, this is really just a piece of metal. There's no woofer, tweeter, all the fancy stuff we have these days. It's just a piece of metal, and it really does a good job of amplifying things, and I'll show you the difference between the two. They used waxed cylinders. I have one, and it's going to play some accordion music. What you're going to do is go through a couple of steps to get this on. So I'm going to open up this door here. I'm actually going to pull the horn back so I can have full access to the cylinder, and we'll put the recording on. Kind of fits in there nicely, and then I'm going to close the door. This is not an electrical device. This is a spring-driven motor. So there is a wind-up mechanism over here that powers it. Now I've already wound that up, so it has enough power to last for one or two songs. There's a position on here where you can see where you want to start the record, and I'm going to line it up with that. And I'm going to go ahead and start the motor. And I'm going to bring this down. Now if I just bring this down, right on it, nothing's going to happen because it's resting on this mechanism here, this piece of metal, so that you don't put it down too hard. And then to actually bring it down, what you'll do is lift it up a little bit and pull out this screw. Now that the screw is depressed, we can actually put the stylus directly onto the record. And here we go.
Accordion solo American Cakewalk, played by John J. Kimball, Edison Records.
And there you go. You get an idea, walk back in time to see what things sounded like. Hopefully the audio came through pretty loudly for you, and now you'll get a demonstration of what it sounds like without the horn. So a little bit of contrast. You can hear how much quieter it is just without that horn. This disc that we played was part of the Edison Gold Mold record line, which was actually the first line that Edison mass produced. I know it's hard to believe, but prior to that, these recordings had to be made one at a time, each individual one, and then they'd sell each one. So there were some artists early on in the days of recording, they would have to make the recording over and over again. You know, things got better and mass production of records was able to come along. And so this was 1902 when they were able to finally mass produce these. That's your basic demonstration. I hope you enjoyed it. So because we're displaying and giving a demonstration of this device here at Studio 3 at EASTWEST Studios in Hollywood, California, the place that the Beach Boys recorded many of their songs, I am going to show what it's like to have recorded a song, not like the Beach Boys recorded it because they had microphones, but if the Beach Boys had to record in the early 1900s, this is what they would have had to do. Stay 6 inches away and sing like this. Gotta keep those love good vibrations are happening with her.
In the introduction, I played a section of a classic rock song, Layla, by the Eric Clapton-led band Derek and the Dominoes. The drummer in that band, Jim Gordon, actually played the piano part on the original recording. Referred to as the piano exit, this movement of Layla was added to the song's arrangement after Eric Clapton heard Jim playing the part. Jim had previously worked on creating this part with his girlfriend, Rita Coolidge. There is some controversy concerning how much Jim contributed versus how much Rita contributed. Rita was never given any songwriting credit for Layla, but Jim was. Jim was raised in the San Fernando Valley area of Los Angeles. A gifted and talented drummer from a young age, Jim began playing gigs in LA clubs when he was 15 years old, and when he was 17, he joined the Everly Brothers. Jim studied drums and music during his high school years, where he attended Ulysses S. Grant High School in Van Nuys. Jim was one of the busiest studio drummers of the 1960s and 70s, appearing on such popular songs as Steely Dan's Ricky Don't Lose That Number, Carly Simon's You're So Vain, Hall & Oates' Sarah's Smile, George Harrison's What Is Life, Traffic's Low Spark of High-Heeled Boys, and many more. In addition to Layla, his unique approach brought life to many hits of that era. For over 35 years, Jim has not played music. In 1983, after succumbing to the forces of an undiagnosed mental disorder, Jim murdered his mother because voices he was hearing told him to do so. Today, he remains incarcerated in a California prison facility. In his autobiography, Eric Clapton concurred that Jim Gordon was the greatest rock drummer that ever lived. He is still regarded by professional drummers as being one of the greatest drummers of his time. Well, that's it for this episode of Music and Machines. We hope that we have provided you with a few new things to help get you excited about the adventure of music and the machines that help make and shape it.